The first time that I saw the work of Ed Lantzer, I was really impressed. He built 8-foot-tall, 28-foot-long scenes from the life of Christ, all out of natural wood. The craftsmanship is remarkable. But the more that I learned about the artist, the more inspired I felt. So stick around, and I'm sure that you'll feel inspired too. This is Ed. Many people thought of him as that crazy homeless person. Kids threw rocks at him as he rode by on his bike. He lived in an abandoned schoolhouse. He ate almost every meal at Bob's Big Boy. He collected wood wherever he could and cut it into half-inch diamonds. And with those diamonds, he created masterpieces. Now, these masterpieces were on display for about a year in Petoskey, Michigan, and 12,000 people visited that display. Petoskey is a small vacation spot on the shores of Lake Michigan. It's a place where people appreciate beauty enough to stop and admire the spectacular sunsets over the lake. Ernest Hemingway found inspiration in the bars and hotels of Petoskey. The downtown area thrives with boutiques and galleries, and this is where we found the Ed Lantzer Gallery. People come to the gallery to marvel at the woodwork or to learn a new perspective on the Bible, but also they come to hear the amazing story of the artist. Edgar Lantzer was born in 1931 in Kalkaska, Michigan. When Ed was about 5, a scarlet fever epidemic swept through the town, affecting Ed and his family.
It killed my younger brother and my grandmother and grandfather. It burned out part of my brain, the right-hand side of my brain, and paralyzed my right side.
That disease took away Ed's ability to write or draw. As Ed grew, his father taught him woodworking skills. At the age of 7, he went to work in a lumber mill. And since childhood, Ed has had a love for wood. Ed's father taught him the art of marquetry, which has been handed down through generations in his family. Marquetry is the art of creating designs by placing pieces of wood side by side. It's often used for making jewelry boxes and game tables. Most marquetry is created by cutting squares of wood at 90 and 45-degree angles. But when Ed was 17, his dad told him
that was his angle, and I had to find my own. So we did the study of angle all the way up as high as I could go, and the 30 degrees is what fascinates me, because what you can incorporate in this thought pattern. I worked for Walt Disney for 3.5 years. With Disney, we were trying to finish out my apprenticeship, where I could say that I was qualified to do any type of work in building there was.
Ed moved back to Kalkaska to be close to his aging parents. While he was reading a C.S. Lewis book, he got a vision to create these unique pieces of art.
Well, the vision that we understand that we're supposed to adhere to is the life of Christ, and narrow it down to a particular day. The Lord's Supper was the actual trial and error. When you do the mathematics on this long, 28-foot long, 8-foot high piece, you start recognizing how much effort went into this one piece. So I started with actually as a pencil mark at the top of the table, about 1 inch long. That's all the marks that are on there. The rest is all feel and vision. I will say that there's 1/8 of an inch sag in the tabletop itself. Could be the floor, too.
In addition to the difficulty of building these scenes without sketches, Ed starts placing pieces in the middle of the picture.
This is the first piece he set down here in the collar of Ed's vision of Jesus at this Last Supper. When Ed put that piece in place, he knew what was going to happen 4.5 feet to the right and 2 3/4 feet to the left.
Yeah, all right, we started there, but then none of the panels could be hooked up before I started the next one.
The physical process of creating one of the panels does start with the plywood backing. And then Ed also built a very supportive support structure that goes on the back side of the panel. Because again, each panel weighs about 400 pounds. And when Ed starts to do the work, again, there's nothing sketched. It's all a matter of taking that design from his thinking and beginning and then incorporating that design throughout the panel. He works in a plate size area, and that's where he concentrates his efforts for that moment. So the magical trick for every woodworker is Elmer's wood glue, and that glue is smeared within this plate size area.
Yes, now you have to remember there's more to this work than what you see or what you can imagine. There's the getting the material and then dedicating your total concentration. That's probably the hardest part because of doubt. Not in the project itself, but in your own ability to, this is a big work. You know, it will be the only one ever in existence in the world. Freehand, natural wood, thought pattern original. The computers might come close, but they'll never figure out how this was done. Never.
Ed's love and passion for wood has been consistent for a lifetime, so much so that there were times in his life where he would earn money to buy more wood. And that was not just to buy more wood, to have some, that was so he could continue to create artwork. And when he was homeless, he was begging for food. He was getting food from people that would give it to him. The money he earned went to buy more wood to create more artwork.
You were homeless, and yet you have all these things. I said, yeah, that's the reason for my homelessness was these things, and I need them because my panels need them. I would have a very difficult time justifying the work.
Ed, his tools, his collection of wood scraps, and the panels were Kalkaska's best-kept secret. But a visitor to the abandoned schoolhouse where Ed lived was about to change all of that. Paul HRESKO ran an ad in the paper for a rental property, and a woman from Grand Rapids answered the ad and told Paul,
she said she felt called to come up to this area but didn't know why. Within the first week she was bored and asked if I knew of how she could volunteer her time. So I introduced her to a nun that I knew in Kalkaska, and they met for lunch, and the nun told her, I think there's something you should see. And when they were done with their lunch, they went out to this abandoned schoolhouse, and they walked to the door, and my renter, Deb, said that this older man came to the door, and behind him are all these wood mosaic murals that tell the story of Christ. And she said, he looked up at me and smiled and said, oh, it's you. The Father said you'd be coming. We ended up moving the panels into a warehouse where the panels were for about 5 years. And that's where Ed did the 2 panels on Adam and Eve. He completed those while at the warehouse. I was so excited to show him this magazine. You know, he was in print. And I took him the magazine, and Ed looked at this briefly, and then he asked me to leave him alone about 3 to 4 hours. He was so overwhelmed by this. And then he asked me to come back because he wanted to pen a thank you to the woman who was responsible for this. And Ed can't write. So he said, I want you to write this for me and send it to her. And so when I went back, it was very short. It was like 3-4 sentences. But what he said to me was for the first time in his life, he felt legitimized not only as an artist, but as a human being. He was there for 5 years. The building then sold, and Ed had to move the panels and himself. And I remember that day calling Ed early in the morning and saying, Ed, where are you gonna stay tonight? Oh, don't worry about me, don't worry about me. And I said, Ed, that wasn't the question. Where are you gonna stay tonight? And then he said, well, I think I'm going to grab a blanket and I'm going to go sleep behind Big Boy. And my wife was on the other line and she heard this and she shook her head and, no, you're not, Ed. At the time, I was a plant manager for automotive supplier, and he used to walk into my office whenever he wanted. I had told the receptionist that was fine, not to stop him, and it was kind of comical actually, because I could be in a meeting with one of the buyers from General Motors or something, and Ed would just walk in and sit down, and these people would kind of look over at him like, Ed would look very disheveled. He'd been working in the workshop or whatever, and he would introduce himself by saying, hello, my name is Edgar Lantzer, and then he'd look at me and he said, Paul is my secretary. I noticed Ed off to the side, and he had tears in his eyes. He's sitting on some boxes. So I stepped away from the group, and I went over and checked on him, and I said, are you all right? I mean, I was really concerned that he had just spent the night in the homeless shelter. I would personally have been devastated. Yet his response to me was, don't worry about me. He said, I just get overwhelmed at times when I realize just how much the Father loves me. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, last night, he said, I had a bed, a warm meal, and a hot shower that I haven't had, and I can't tell you how long. And he said, I just get overwhelmed when I realize just how much the Father takes care of me and how much he loves me and how much he provides for me.
At that point, Ed's health was far worse than it is today. He was suffering breathing difficulty. He was suffering from the after effects of stomach cancer surgery. He just was not in good condition.
We have to get to this knowing, well, just the last 3 years of my life, the year and a half in intensive care, and the nurses coming down twice a night and turning me over in my own refuge, not being able to lay down and to hold yourself up. Eventually you couldn't. And they'd wash you up and you'd go through the same cycle again. But there was nothing they could do about it. Even after the 3.5 years and being bedridden and so on, I still feel that this was and is the only choice in my life.
I think he was down to like 120 pounds or less, and the doctors were not optimistic that he would ever come out of there. I asked a woman who was in a prayer group that I was a part of if she would pray with Ed. So she went to visit him. She felt called, like I felt called, to help him in the panel. She felt called to pray with him, and so she did, and she began praying with him, and he began just to flip around. He began to put on weight. He began to just blossom. So I go to visit Ed in the nursing home, and again, something's telling me specifically to ask Ed, who was this historical figure that was so influential in the creation of these panels and what he depicted? And Ed is all wrapped up in these blankets at the time, and his face was even buried, and he answered me, C.S. Lewis. You know, I am kind of embarrassed because it seems like everybody in the world knows who C.S. Lewis is, and I couldn't remember that name to save my life. Now I'll never forget it, but he said on the floor, he said there is a CD, a book on CD, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. He said, why don't you listen to that on your way to your meeting in Petoskey? 20 minutes into my meeting with Dale Hull, he stops the meeting and asks me a question. He said, have you ever heard of C.S. Lewis? And my jaw just drops, and I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, why? And so I explained to him what had happened, and I said, why are you asking me? And he says that they're putting on this, one of the things they do in Petoskey is they have an annual C.S. Lewis festival. And I said, oh my gosh. I got out this copy of the Travers magazine, and I told him the story, and I said, this would be perfect for it to make its debut at the C.S. Lewis Festival.
Ed had been thinking about these designs dreaming about them, because that's how he comes to the mental conclusions of what the designs will look like. It's a dream process and conversation with God. Is that when he finished those designs, he was also reading C.S. Lewis. And he admires the way C.S. Lewis moved from being an atheist to a Christian and the journey that he went on. And at the time he was reading Lewis and the designs completed in his head, it's boom, he had to start. And then it's been 35 years of straight work.
I get a phone call from Dale about a week before we're supposed to, or 2 weeks before we're supposed to move the panels up here, and he said, Paul, he said, do you know anybody who knows how to install massively heavy pieces of artwork? And I said, no, and I kind of chuckled. I said, is that actually a job? And he says, yes, because I said, I don't have any experience in the art world. Mine was all automotive. So I called some of my engineer friends in the automotive industry, and they kind of laughed at me, and they said, you know, no, we wouldn't know how to do this. And I remembered for the first time I heard Ed's voice in my own head saying, Paul, don't worry about it. Just pray about it. The Father will take care of it. So I did this for 2 days, throughout my days. And on day 2, I'm at the hydro facility. It's a dam, a water plant in Oak Rapids, generates electricity. Towards the end of the meeting, I just kind of laughed, and I said, so have you always run dams? It seems like such an obscure profession. And he laughed and he said, no, actually, he said, I'm from Seattle. He said, I worked with museums and galleries and private collectors installing massively heavy pieces of artwork.
Well, I first became involved with this project pretty innocently. I am a member of the C.S. Lewis Festival planning team and a member of that board of directors. The C.S. Lewis Festival is a month-long festival that happens in northern Michigan in the fall. And we heard about this artist that was inspired by Lewis. So those of us on the planning team decided with some information that we should bring Ed's artwork to Petoskey to support this one-week event. And the intent was this exhibit would be in town 3 weeks. As soon as we unloaded the artwork and installed it, we realized that we had something special. And at that point, my life changed from being involved in a 1-week/3 week event to I was then called by God, called by a man I just met to partner and tell a story.
Well, that evening when we were doing the installation, there was a woman who came in with an ice cream cone, kind of just checking things out, and asked if she could look at what we were doing. And probably about 15 minutes later, I saw her off into the corner, and she had tears in her eyes. And I went back there and I said, are you all right? And she said, yeah. She said, I'm rather embarrassed. She said, I don't know what's happened to me. She said, somehow standing within these panels, my faith has been completely restored. She said, 3 years ago, I left my church. And she said, I will be back in church on Sunday.
It makes you ask yourself a lot of questions. The necessity of doing it, the time, should I be doing something else? Driving a truck or digging ditches. Either one have a purpose. So did I choose the right purpose for my life? And I contend that I did.
Why me? Why Petoskey? Why Ed? It's the kind of questions that you're left with, and the only answer you come back to is, well, God did that.
So I picked up Ed and I brought him up here. And when we pulled in, up in front of the gallery, and I helped Ed out of the car, these people all stood up, and the ones outside the gallery began to give him this standing ovation. And Ed had these tears coming down his face. And he just turned around and looked at me and he said, Paul, he said, I don't understand. I'm the same person. And what he meant, and he explained later, was, you know, there were times in his life where he was mocked and ridiculed, knocked off his bike, even spit upon, but would literally dust himself off, go back to where his panels were and continue to work on them and doing this work for Christ. And I can't imagine what that must be like for him, because as he said, he's the same person. What's different? Why is he being treated this way? You know, for me even, although I would never be one of those people who would spit upon or ridicule or knock a homeless person over, I even now wonder, traveling through certain areas where I see those individuals and wonder, what magnificent thing have you done? Whereas before I would think, oh, you poor soul, how did you end up this way? I don't do that anymore. I'm more, what magnificent thing have you created in the world?
Our church recently partnered with the Nehemiah Project, which is a local homeless shelter. Ed's homeless, was homeless. Some of the homeless residents of that shelter have been in and met Ed. Another way to connect, another way to offer hope. Our church has had Bible study groups here. There's no better place to talk about your faith, ask the questions about your faith, admit that you're struggling than in this place. It's not a church, but we've defined it as a holy place because God is present everywhere. And when my own men's Bible study group sat in a circle and Jesus was looking at me and looking over the shoulder of someone in that circle and the disciples were listening, how more powerful can you get? It's like it was a three-dimensional understanding. The men that you're learning about and learning what they did and how they did it are right here with you. And their struggles are no different than mine. It's just that they were 2,000 years earlier. Since then, our church has taken on My Father's Love Gallery as one of our outreach opportunities. And by that it means people from our congregation come and volunteer to be tour guides. For me, what happened, every week I'm challenged by a minister or a fellow congregation member to go out and talk about my faith. Well, that sounds really easy until you have to do it. And you're always wondering how somebody's going to receive you. Well, here, I talked about faith and the spiritual journey that Ed refers to, and pretty soon I'm relating to people about their spiritual journey, and it's my spiritual journey, and pretty soon I'm talking about my faith.
My dad never saw the work. We used to have a lot of competition between his work and mine, go to art shows, and he would build something, and then I would build something, and we'd argue about who did it the best, and the concept the best. And it was a lot of fun that way, but he never saw my work and what it amounted to. He will never know what he's done for me personally in teaching, taking the time to teach. I don't think any teacher in the world really sits down and figure out how really necessary they are just for the continuance of life as opposed to savagery. If we didn't have Christ, we'd be total savages. When success becomes greater than obedience, then it has no value at all. Yeah, isn't that going to be wonderful when we sit down and individually say, well done? Yeah. If it's at all possible, I want to hear those words. Then the rest of it would be worthwhile. I want to do another panel, a large panel like these. So there's one more story to tell. And there's so many stories to tell. I need to build another one so that I have the climax. I have the beginning, with Adam and Eve at the beginning. How about the ending? What does my mind's eye talk about in the beginning or in the ending, how do we join these two things together? Is it possible? And I say it is. And I'd like to build another panel to express this very thing. The termination of this experience. And of course I'm talking about the resurrection that I felt for so many years was too beautiful to express in wood. And I don't know, the meaning was not there, but now it is. My life's work is entirely interwoven with this woodwork. And we're going to have to come to the point one day to say it's enough. And I lay the pieces down and give them to someone else and let them continue with the thought pattern that's here. We brought it a long ways, but there's so much more. Like with Dale, he's experienced a new phase in his life. John, same way. And all of the individuals who have touched the panels, it's affected them. My job is nearly done. I kind of have to keep my nose clean for another 30 years, but it's probably going to be worth it.
What do you want to hear him say?
Well done. That's all. That I've taken my life and made something beyond what's normal. And that would be enough. Just well done.